this morning, that thing didn't go on. I had to go back and turn it back on. I saw that it hadn't started. This book, a lot of people kind of deny the authenticity of this, some of the things in it. I don't know what I have seen in it, what I've studied, and I really studied it, as you can see. I've written it all over the thing. And studying the Bible and studying many histories. I have studied, well, David's seen my history, but Mike, you've seen my history library. It's 7 foot tall and 4 feet wide, and I've read those books. I mean, I've read them. And what I found in history, there are many other history sources besides this: Philo, Josephus, Eusebius history, the Ante-Nicene Fathers, that means before the Council of Nicaea. All of these books and many more, you can find things, a little bits and pieces in history. Okay? And this is a little bit and piece of history that describes Jesus. Now, it is a historical fact that Pontius Pilate wanted to release Jesus. He did not believe he was guilty of anything. You see it in the Bible. Many people say, oh, he's a coward, he wouldn't do this kind of stuff. But you know what? He was the governor of the area, and he had to protect the fortress that he was over and everything else. And I think in the end, he gave one man's life to save an empire's foothold in that area.
Well,
but he thought he was more than a man.
It's my understanding that he could not politically afford another uprising.
Yeah. Now he, in this book, or in this letter that he writes to Caesar, you're going to hear some things in there about it. He didn't like the Jews at all, but he liked Jesus. And he had protected Jesus for a long time. And he tells him in this letter, because it tells about him interviewing Jesus one time. Now, Pilate was Roman and Spanish mixed. He's a very brave man. He had fought in wars and everything. But he's going to tell you from his standpoint here, this letter. And we know also that Pontius Pilate did write a letter to Caesar and asked them to recognize Jesus as a God, as deity.
As a God.
As deity.
As the God?
As a God or deity. Now you're going to see what he says in this letter. But that is a historical fact. That's in history that we know that he did that. Okay? To tribute Caesar, Emperor of Rome, noble sovereign, greeting. The events of the last few days in my province have been of such character that I will give the details in full as they occurred, as I should not be surprised if in the course of time they may change the destiny of our nation. For it seems of late that all the gods have ceased to be propitious. I am almost ready to say, cursed be the day that I succeeded Valerius Flacius in the government of Judea, for since then my life has been one of continual uneasiness and distress. On my arrival at Jerusalem, I took possession of the Praetorium and ordered a splendid feast to be prepared, to which I invited the Tetrarch of Galilee with the high priest and his officers. At the appointed hour, no guest appeared. This I considered an insult offered to my dignity and to the whole government which I represent. A few days after the high priest deigned to pay me a visit. His deportment was grave and deceitful. He pretended that his religion forbade him and his attendants to sit at the table of the Romans and eat offered libations with them. But this was only a sanctimonious seeming, for his very countenance betrayed his hypocrisy. Although I thought it expedient to accept his excuse from the moment, I was convinced that the conquered had declared themselves the enemy of the conquerors. And I would warn the Romans to beware of the high priest and the country, of this country. They would betray their own mother to gain office and a luxurious living. What did Jesus say? It seems to me that of conquered cities, Jerusalem is the most difficult to govern in our whole empire. So turbulent are the people that I live in momentary dread of an insurrection. I have not soldiers sufficient to suppress it. I have only one centurion and 100 men at my command. I request a reinforcement from the prefect of Syria, who informed me that he had scarcely troops sufficient to defend his own province. In insatiate thirst for conquest to contend our empire beyond the means of defending it, I fear will be the cause of the final overthrow of our own government. I lived secluded from the masses, for I did not know what those priests might influence the rabble to do. Yet I endeavored to ascertain as far as I could the mind and the standing of the people. Among the various rumors that came to my ears, there was one in particular that attracted my attention. A young man, it was said, had appeared in Galilee preaching with a noble unction, a new law, and in the name of God that had sent him. At first I was apprehensive that this design was to stir up the people against the Romans, but my fears were soon dispelled. Jesus of Nazareth spoke rather as a friend of the Romans than of the Jews. Just think of the Bible. Just remember, this is after all of this happened. This is after the crucifixion. Okay. One day in passing by the place of Siloam, where there was a great concourse of people, I observed in the midst of the group a young man who was leaning against a tree, calmly addressing the multitude. I was told it was Jesus. It gives a physical a description of him also. This I could easily have suspected, so great was the difference between him and those listening to him. His golden hair and beard gave him his appearance of a celestial aspect. He appeared to be about 30 years of age. One of the things historically, Jesus had blonde hair. We know that historically. Did you know that?
No.
He had blonde hair. And one of the things was that they said that Mary had had an affair with a German because they were blonde. All right? And that was one of the historical things. Am I telling you things that you didn't know at all? Mm-hmm. All right? Well, this is something that you're studying. Anyway, he had blonde hair. Now it tells us he's describing he has the right color hair in this letter. Never have I seen a sweeter and more sincere countenance. What a contrast between him and his hearers and their black beards and tawny complexions. Unwilling to interrupt him by my presence, I continued to walk, but signified to my secretary to join the group and listen. My secretary's name is Manlius. He is the grandson of chief of the conspirators who encamped in Turia, waiting for Catiline. Manlius had been for a long time in the inhabitant of Judea and is well acquainted with the Hebrew language. He was devoted to me and worthy of my confidence. On entering the praetorium, I found Manlius, who related to me the words that Jesus had pronounced at Siloam. Never have I read in the works of the philosophers any that can compare to the maxims of Jesus. Just pay attention to what's going on here now. This is a historical letter, all right? One of the rebellious Jews, so numerous in Jerusalem, having asked Jesus, and this is recorded in the Bible, asked Jesus if it will also to give tribute to Caesar. He replied, "Render unto Caesar the things that belong to Caesar, and unto God the things that are God's." It was on account of the wisdom of his sayings that I granted so much liberty to the Nazarene. For it was in my power to have him arrested and exiled to Pontius. But that would have been contrary to the justice which has always characterized the Roman government. In all its dealings with men, this man was neither seditious nor rebellious. I extended to him my protection, unknown perhaps to himself. He was at liberty to act, speak, and assemble, and address the people, and to choose disciples unrestrained by any praetorian mandate. Now just think about that now. Could that have happened back then? Mm-hmm. Jesus had a large group. Could Pontius Pilate have stopped that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, now everything so far that we read in the letter agrees with the Bible, doesn't it? And with history. And some things in between the lines in the Bible. Should it ever happen, may the gods avert the omen, should it ever happen, I say, that the religion of our forefathers be supplanted by the religion of Jesus, it will be able to this noble toleration that Rome shall owe her premature death, while I, miserable wretch, will have been the instrument of what the Jews call providence and we call destiny. This unlimited freedom granted to Jesus provoked the Jews, not the poor, but the rich and the powerful. It is true Jesus was severe on the latter. Again, what did Jesus do? He came down on the religious people, the leaders of his day. And this was a political reason, in my opinion, for not restraining the liberty of the Nazarenes. Scribes and Pharisees, he would say to them, you are a race of vipers. You resemble painted sepulchres. You appear well unto men, but have death within you. At other times he would sneer at the alms of the rich and proud, telling them that the mite of a poor was more precious in the sight of God. Complaints were daily made at the praetorium against the insolence of Jesus. Is that what happened? All right. I was even informed that some misfortune would befall him. Did they try to kill Jesus? That it would not be the first time that Jerusalem had stoned those who call themselves prophets. Is that in the Bible? An appeal would be made to Caesar. However, my conduct was approved by the Senate, and I was promised a reinforcement after the termination of the Parthian War. Being 2 weeks distressed in insurrection, I resolved upon adopting a measure that promised to restore the tranquility of the city without suspecting the praetorium to humiliating concession. I wrote to Jesus, requesting an interview with him at the praetorium. He came. This isn't in the Bible. But you pay attention to what he says here. This is part that makes Marilyn's hair stand on end. She's real curly right now, but just watch a little bit. It'll be straight as a string. You know in my veins flows the Spanish mixed with Roman blood, incapable of fear, as it is a weak emotion. When the Nazarene made his appearance, I was walking in my basilic, and my feet seemed fastened to an iron hand to the marble pavement. I trembled in every limb, as does a guilty culprit. Though the Nazarene was as calm as innocence itself, when he came up to me, he stopped, and by a signal he seemed to say to me, I am here. Though he spoke not a word, for some time I contemplated with admiration all this extraordinary type of man, a type of man unknown to our numerous painters who have given form to the figure of all the gods and the heroes. There was nothing about him that was repelling in its least character, yet I felt too awed and tremulous to approach him. Jesus, I said unto him at last, and my tongue faltered, Jesus of Nazareth. For the last 3 years I've granted you ample freedom of speech, nor do I regret it. Your words are those of a sage. I know not whether you have read Socrates or Plato, but this I know, there is in your discourses a majestic simplicity that elevates you far above those philosophers. The Emperor is informed of it, and I, his humble representative in this country, am glad to have having allowed you the liberty with which you are so worthy. However, I must not conceal from you that your discourses have raised up against you powerful and inveterate enemies. Is this all true? Nor is this surprising. Socrates had his enemies. What happened to Socrates? Basically, he was executed. And he fell victim to their hatred. Yours are doubly incensed against you on account of your discourses being so severe upon their conduct. Was Jesus severe upon these people? Against me on account of the liberty I have afforded you. Were they complaining to Pilate? Maybe you can understand just a little bit more after we read this. This is a historical thing now, not biblical, but historical. They even accuse you of being indirectly leagued with you for the purpose of depriving the Hebrews of the little civil power which Rome has left them. My request, I do not say, my order is that you be more circumspect and moderate in your discourses in the future, and more considerate of them, lest you arouse the pride of your enemies, and they raise against you the stupid populace, and compel me to employ the instruments of the law. The Nazarene calmly replied, Prince of the earth, your words proceed not from true wisdom, save to the torrent to stop in the midst of mountain gorge. In other words, it won't stop a flood. It will unroot the trees of the valley. The torrent will answer you that it obeys the laws of nature and the Creator. God alone knows whether the water flows or of the torrent. Verily I say unto you, before the rose of Sharon blossoms, the blood of the just shall be spilled. Your blood shall not be spilled, I said with deep emotion. You are more precious in my estimation on account of your wisdom than all the turbulent and proud Pharisees who abuse freedom and granted to them by the Romans. They conspire against Caesar. They convert his bounty into fear, impressing the unlearned that Caesar is a tyrant and seeks their ruin. Insolent wretches. They are not too aware that the wolf of the Tiber sometimes clothes himself in the skin of the sheep to accomplish his wicked designs. I will protect you against them. My praetorium shall be an asylum, sacred both day and night. Jesus carelessly shook his head and said with a grave and divine smile, when the day shall have come, there will be no asylum for the Son of Man, neither in the earth nor under the earth. The asylum of the just is there, pointing to the heavens. That is written in the books of the prophets must be accomplished. Young man, I answered mildly, you will oblige me to convert my request into an order. The safety of the promise which has been confided in my care requires it. You must observe more moderation in your discourses. Do not infringe my order. You know the consequences. My happiness attends you. Farewell. Prince of the earth, replied Jesus, I come not to bring war into the world, but peace, love, and charity. I was born on the same day in which Augustus Caesar gave peace to the Roman world. You want to know what day Jesus was born? Go back and figure that one out. Persecutions proceed not from me. I expect it from others, and I will meet in obedience to the will of my Father, who has shown me the way. Restrain, therefore, your worldly prudence. It is not in your power to arrest the victim at the foot of the tabernacle of expiation. So saying, he disappeared like a bright shadow behind the curtains of a basilica. To my great relief, for I felt a heavy burden on me, of which I could not relieve myself while in his presence. To Herod, who then reigned in Galilee, the enemies of Jesus addressed themselves to wreak their vengeance on the Nazarene. Had Herod consulted his own inclinations, he would have ordered Jesus immediately to be put to death. But though proud of his royal dignity, yet he hesitated to commit an act that would lessen his influence with the Senate, or, like me, was afraid of Jesus. But it would never do for a Roman officer to be scared of a Jew. Previously to this, Herod called on me at the praetorium, and on rising to take leave, after some trifling conversation, asked me what was my opinion concerning the Nazarene. I replied, Jesus appeared to me to be one of those great philosophers that great nations sometimes produce, that his doctrines were by no means sacrilegious, and that the intentions of Rome were to lead him to that freedom of speech which was justified by his actions. Herod smiled maliciously, and saluting with me, and ironically, respect and departed. The great feast of the Jews was approaching, and the intention was to avail themselves of the popular exultation which always manifests itself at the solemnities of the Passover. The city was overflowing with a tumultuous polis, clamoring for the death of the Nazarene. This is from Pilate's point of view what was going on in the city. My emissaries informed me that the treasure of the temple had been employed in bribing the people. How did they pay for Judas's betrayal? The danger was pressing. A Roman centurion had been insulted. I wrote to the prefect of Syria for 100 soldiers and many cavalrymen. He declined. I saw myself alone with a handful of veterans in the midst of a rebellious city, too weak to suppress an uprising and having no choice left but to tolerate it. They had seized upon Jesus, and the seditious rabble, although they had nothing to fear from the praetorium, believing, as their leaders had told them, that I winked at the sedition, continued screaming, "Crucify him, crucify him." What did the Bible say about that? That's exactly what they did. Now listen to what he says about this. Three powerful parties had combined together at the time against Jesus. The Herodians and the Sadducees, whose seditious conduct seemed to have proceeded from the double motives that they hated the Nazarene and were impatient with the Roman yoke. They never forgave me for having entered the holy city with banners that bore the image of the Roman emperor. And although in this instance I had committed a fatal error, yet the sacrilege did not appear less heinous to their eyes. Another grievous also rankled in their bosoms. I had proposed to employ a part of the treasure of the temple in erecting edifices to public use. My proposal was scorned. The Pharisees were avowed enemies of Jesus. They cared not for the government. They bore with bitterness the severe reprimands which the Nazarene for 3 years had been continually giving them wherever they went. Timid and too weak to act by themselves, they had embraced the quarrels of the Herodians and the Sadducees. Besides these three parties, I had to contend against the reckless and profligate populace, always ready to join in sedition and to profit by the disorder and confusion of the resulted thereof. Jesus was dragged before the high priest. Who was that? Caiaphas. And condemned to death. It was then that the high priest Caiaphas performed a divisory act of submission. He sent his prisoner to me to confirm his condemnation and secure his execution. You know, they could not execute anybody. The Jews couldn't. Not since Jesus was born could they execute anybody. They had taken the right of capital punishment away from them as a nation. They had to go to the Romans. I answered him that as Jesus was a Galilean, the affair came under Herod's jurisdiction and ordered him to be sent there. The wily tetrarch professed humility and protested his deference to the lieutenant of Caesar and committed the fate of this man to my hands. Soon my palace assumed the aspect of besieged citadel. He was besieged. Every moment increased the number of the malcontents. Jesus was inundated with crowds from the mountains of Nazareth, and all Judea appeared to be pouring into the city. I had taken a wife from among the Gauls who pretended to see into futurity. Weeping and throwing herself at my feet, she said to me, now what does the Bible say about Pilate's wife? That she had had a vision. Mm-hmm. Beware and do not touch not that man, for he is holy. Last night I saw him in a vision. He was walking on the waters. He was flying on the wings of the wind. He spoke to the tempest and to the fishes of the lake, and all were obedient to him. Behold, the torrent in the Mount Kidron flows with blood, and the statues of Caesar are filled with genocide. The columns of the interim have given away, and the sun is veiled in mourning like a vestal in the tomb. Is that what happened? Ah, Pilate, evil awaits thee. If you will not listen to the vows of your wife, dread the curse of the Roman Senate, dread the frowns of Caesar. By this time the marble stair groaned under the weight of the multitude. The Nazarene was brought back to me. I proceeded to the halls of justice, followed by my guard, and asked the people in a severe tone what they demanded. The death of Nazarene was the reply. For what crime? He has blasphemed. He has prophesied the ruin of the temple. He calls himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews. Roman justice, said I, punishes not such offenses with death. How many times did Pontius Pilate say Jesus was innocent? 5 times. 5 times. Crucify him, cried the relentless rabble. The vociferous and infuriated mob shook the palace to the foundations. The whole place was shaking under their stomping, screaming, shouting voices. There was but one appeared to be calm in all the midst of the vast multitude. It was the Nazarene. After many fruitless attempts to protect him from the fury of his merciless persecutors, I adopted a measure which at the moment appeared to me to be the only thing that could save his life. I proposed, as it was their custom to deliver a prisoner on such occasions, to release Jesus and let him go free, that he might be the scapegoat, as they called it. but they said, Jesus must be crucified. I then spoke to them in inconsistency of their course as being incapable of their law, showing that no criminal judge could pass sentence on a criminal unless he had fasted one whole day. Was this the law? Absolutely. And that the sentence must have the consent of the Sanhedrin and the signature of the president of the court, that no criminal could be executed on the same day his sentence was fixed. This is according to the Jewish law. And the next day, on the day of his execution, the Sanhedrin was required to review the whole trial again. Also, according to their law, a man was stationed at the door of the court with a flag, and another a short way off on horseback to cry the name of the criminal and his crime and the names of his witnesses, and to know if anyone could testify in his favor. This is Jewish law. All right? Now, it doesn't say this in the Bible, what was going on, but this is the Jewish law that was supposed to take place at this time. And the prisoner on his way to execution had the right to turn back 3 times and to plead a new thing in his favor. I urged all these pleas, hoping that they might awe them into subjection, but they still cried, Crucify him, crucify him. I then ordered Jesus to be scourged, hoping this might satisfy them. But it only increased their fury. Then I called for a basin and washed my hands in the presence of the clamorous multitude, thus testifying that in my judgment Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing deserving of death, but in vain it was his life these wretches thirsted for. Often in our civil commotions have I witnessed the furious anger of the multitude, but nothing could be compared to what I witnessed on this occasion. It might have been truly said that all the phantoms of the infernal regions had assembled themselves at Jerusalem. That means all the demons. The crowd appeared not to walk, but to be borne off and whirled in a vortex of rolling, living waves from the portals of the Praetorium even to the Mount Zion, while howling screams and shrieks and vociferous such as were never heard in the seditions of the Panoria or in the tumults of the Forum. By degrees the day darkened like a winter's twilight, such as had been at the death of the great Julius Caesar. It was likewise the Ides of March. I, continued governor of the rebellious province, was leaning against the column of my basilica, contemplating athwart the dreary gloom these fiends of Tartarus dragging to execution the innocent Nazarene. All around me was deserted. Jerusalem had vomited forth her indwellers through the funeral gate that leads to Yamanica. An air of desolation and sadness enveloped me. My guards had joined the cavalry and the centurion with a display of power and was endeavoring to keep peace and order. I was left alone. My breaking heart admonished me that what I was passing at the moment appertained rather to the history of the gods than of men. A loud clamor was heard proceeding from Golgotha, which bore on the wind seemed to be announced an agony such as never was heard by mortal ears. Dark clouds lowered over the pinnacle of the temple, setting over the city, covered it as a veil. So dreadful were the signs that men saw both in the heavens and on the earth that Ctesionius the Areopagite is reported to have exclaimed, either the author of nature is suffering or the universe is falling apart. While these appalling scenes of nature were transpiring, there was a dreadful earthquake in the lower Egypt which filled everybody with fear, and the sacred superstitions of superstitious Jews almost to death. It is at Belshazzar, an aged and learned Jew in Antioch, was found dead after the excitement was over. Whether he died from the alarm of grief is not known. He is a strong friend of the Nazarene. Near the first hour of the night, I threw my mantle around me and went down into the city toward the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice was consummated. The crowd was returning home and still agitated, it is true, but gloomy and taciturn and desperate. What they had witnessed had stricken them with terror and remorse. I also saw my little Roman cohort pass by mournfully, the standard bearer having veiled his eagle in a token of grief. Over some of the Jewish soldiers murmuring strange words which I did not understand. Others were recounting miracles very large which they had so often smited the Romans by the will of the gods. Sometimes the groups of men and women would halt, then looking back toward Mount Calvary would remain motionless in expectation of witnessing some new prodigy. I returned to the Praetorium, sad and pensive. On ascending the stairs, the steps of which still stained with the blood of the Nazarene, I perceived an old man in a suppliant posture, behind him several Romans in tears. He threw himself at my feet and wept most bitterly. It is painful to me to see an old man weep, and my heart began already overcharged with grief. We, those strangers, wept together. And in truth it seemed that the tears lay very shallow that day, with many whom I perceived in the vast concourse of people. I never witnessed such an extreme revulsion of feeling. Those who betrayed and sold him, those who testified against him, those who cried, "Crucify him," we have his blood all slunk off like cowardly curs washed their teeth with vinegar. As I told that Jesus taught a resurrection and a separation after death, if such should be the fact, I am sure it commenced in this vast crowd. "Father," I said to this man, after gaining control of my feelings, "who are you and what do you want?" "I am Joseph of Arimathea." Is that what happened? "And I'm come to beg you on my knees permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." "Your prayer is granted," I said to him. And at the same time I ordered my analyst to take some soldiers with him to superintend the interment, and lest it should be profaned. A few days afterwards, the sepulchre was found empty. Jesus had risen from the dead, as he had foretold. This created more excitement than the crucifixion itself. Joseph buried Jesus in his own tomb. Whether he contemplated the resurrection or calculated to cut him another one, I cannot tell. The day after, one of the priests came to the Praetorium and requested Roman soldiers to go over there and seal the tomb. He said, "I told him to go do the best you can." You aren't getting one of my men for this. He said they took the soldiers. And then he asked one of the people that was there at the resurrection. He told me that Isham and the soldiers were very much alarmed at what they had occurred there that morning. I sent this man Isham, who related to me, as near as I can recollect, the following circumstance. He said that at about the beginning of the fourth watch, they saw a soft and beautiful light over the sepulchre. He at first thought that the women had come to embalm the body of Jesus, as it was their custom, but they could not see how they had gotten through the guards. While these thoughts were passing through his mind, behold, the whole place was lit up, and there seemed to be crowds of the dead in their grave clothes. What happened when Jesus rose from the dead? Huh? There were many people that rose from the dead. Okay. Yeah, they rose from the dead. All seemed to be shouting and filled with ecstasy, while all around above was the most beautiful music he had ever heard. And the whole air seemed to be full of voices praising God. At this time, this seemed to be reeling and swimming on the earth, so that they turned sick and faint, that they could not stand on their feet. He said that the earth seemed to be swim under him, and his senses left him, so that he didn't know what did happen. I asked him in what condition he was when he came to himself. He said he was laying on the ground with his face down. I asked him if he could not have been mistaken as to the light. Was it not day that was coming to the east? He said at first he thought of that, but at a stone's cast it was extremely dark. And then he remembered it was too early for day. I asked him if his dizziness might have come from being weakened, getting up too suddenly, or it sometimes had that effect on people. And he said no. He had not slept all night. As a penalty was death for him to sleep on duty. He said he had let some of the soldiers sleep at the time, and some were asleep. I asked him how long the scene lasted, and he said he did not know, but he thought nearly an hour. He said it was hid by the light of day, and I asked him if he went to the sepulchre after he had come to himself. He said no. He was afraid. that just as soon as the relief came, they all went to their quarters. I asked him if he had been questioned by the priest. He said that he had, and they wanted him to say it was an earthquake, and that they were asleep, and offered him money to say the disciples came and stole Jesus. Is that what happened? That is exactly what happened. That's what the Bible says. But they saw no disciples. He did not know that the body was gone until he was told that. I asked him what the private opinion of those priests he had conversed with, and he said that some of them said that Jesus was no man, that he was not a human being, and that he was not the son of Mary, that he was not the same that said to be born of a virgin in Bethlehem, and that the same persons had been on earth before Abraham and Lot, and at some times and places. It seems to me that it was a Jewish theory to be true. These conclusions are correct, that they are accord with this man's life, as is known to testify by both friends and foes, for the elements were no more in his hands than the clay in the hands of a potter. He would convert water into wine. He could change death to life, disease into health, and could calm the seas, still the storms, call up fish with a silver coin in his mouth. Now I say, if he could do all these things, which he did, and many more, as the Jews all testify, and was doing these things that created this enmity against him, he was not charged with criminal offenses, nor was he charged with violating any law, nor wronging any individual in person, and all these facts are known to thousands as well as his foes by his friends. I am almost ready to say, as did Manlius at the cross, truly, this was the Son of God. Now, noble sovereign, this is as near the facts in the case that I can arrive at, and I have taken pains to make the statement very full, so that you may judge on my conduct upon the whole, as I hear that Antipater has said many hard things in me in this matter, with a promise of faithfulness and good wishes to my noble sovereign. I am your most obedient servant, Pontius Pilate. What do you think about that? Make your hair stand on end? Just a little bit? That fills in between the lines in the Bible, doesn't it? I believe it. Well, it's scripturally accurate.
On what grounds do people discount that?
The same grounds that they discount the Book of Enoch. They know where it come from, whatever. It tells you in the first part of that book how it was found, and there was a guy that could read ancient Greek. It was written in Greek, I believe, and that they found this book there, and that he wanted to print it, and that he had finally got copies of it and translated it and printed it. And anyway, you can look that up. Did you enjoy that? Well,
it'd be nice to know if it was true, because it certainly is. It's fascinating. It's so well written.
Mm-hmm. It was written from Pontius Pilate's point of view. Now, last week we studied the Lord's Supper, and we looked at that in the 11 essential elements of a New Testament church. Remember that? Now, if I can find that. Here they are. I thought I would throw that one in because there's a lot of history to study. We're studying church history. You can study a lot of sources. I won't have time to go in all of them. When I studied church history, I studied them all. And I just relate to you interesting little things that go on so far. All right? All right. Now let's go on down in church history. Where did we finish in the 11 elements of the New Testament church? Do you remember? Did we get all the way down to the bottom? And the last thing is the separation of church and state. Did we get to that? You remember?
Where's it written out? Where's it written?
That's it right there. You can find it on the website. Okay? We've talked about the Lord's Supper before. Does anybody need an extra copy of this? I've got an extra one if you want it. I don't want to have to cover the ground again, but because we really went through it last week. All right? And we studied about the prerequisite to the Lord's Supper and all of that. We talked about baptism. We talked about the offices in the church. What are the two offices in a church? Pastors and deacons. Now, how about elders?
Same thing as a deacon.
All right, a deacon and a pastor is an elder. Okay. Now, the Presbyterian church elects elders. They are Presbyterian rule in their church. The elders rule the church. Okay. Now, their idea of elders, and it talks about the elders in the church, but the elders are deacons and pastors. God's churches are not ruled by elders, are they? It's democracy. It's ruled by the people, by the church. Okay? And how are we supposed to support the church? How is the church supposed to be supported? By tithes and offerings. Now, next Sunday, every year they have a what we call this. Can't think of the term right now. A time of year that people think about their stewardship, the commitments of stewardship, of tithing and everything. Now, over the years, how often do I talk about tithing? Every time it comes up in Scripture, we talked about it several times. Well, just 2 or 4 weeks ago, something like that, the last time. And so I don't just leave it off to once a year, but whenever we come across it in Scriptures, I teach about it. What in the world did Cain get in trouble with? The wrong offering and the wrong amount. It's probably the tithe. And he hadn't brought the right division. That's what it uses, the word division in there. He hadn't brought the right amount, and he brought the wrong offering too. The wrong amount and the wrong offering. All right. Well, we support the churches by tithes and offerings, 1 Corinthians 9:14. It has the right means of propagating and defending the gospel. We don't go out and make converts by the sword. We don't force people to be Christians, do we? Do you ever make somebody be a Christian? It's impossible. It's impossible to make somebody be a Christian. Now, the Catholic Church, by force, conquered and called their empire the Holy Roman Empire. But really, none of those people were converted, and they brought a lot of paganism into the Catholic Church. That's where they have all these ceremonies and all the things that they do in there. It's right out of paganism. They brought it in. The last thing is that this church must have independence from all earthly powers. No other power besides Jesus is over a New Testament church. No power besides Jesus is over a New Testament church. No church has to accept the baptism of any other church. Did you know that? As Baptist churches, we don't have to do that. We don't do it. No church has to accept the baptism of any other church. No church, as an independent church, has to accept the edicts of association or a convention. The edicts of it. You can do what you want to do. The Southern Baptist Convention, even missionary Baptist churches, they have local associations. There's an association going to meet this week here at the church, isn't there? Association can make recommendations, but it can't set any laws. It can make recommendations and it can talk about all kinds of things, how to send out missionaries and everything. It can't make any church do these things because churches voluntarily support these issues. All right? Now, these are all elements of a New Testament church as it is today. Now, let's go back in time. Okay?
Can I?
Yes, you can ask a question, brother.
If that is the case, then how do we justify the fact that we are 5013C corporations?
Well, I forgot to bring something to you this week.
Because
we're what they call a non-profit organization.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we are under the guise of the federal government.
Yes. There are churches.
We are bound to their.
We are what we are bowing down to the government. We are trying to exist in such a way as we don't offend the government, and the government doesn't offend us. There are Baptists today, and the Mennonites, some of the old hard-shell Mennonites, some of the old hard-line Amish, they won't have anything to do with the United States government. They won't. They just separate themselves from state and church.
So in those cases, they pay their tithes and then they pay their taxes off of the tithes.
Say that again, brother.
So if you separate yourself from the federal government and you have a church and you have a pastor that's being paid by the church, he has to pay his taxes on his wages.
Already,
well, he does, but
Roger has to pay taxes on his.
Yeah, he has to pay taxes.
But the church doesn't have to. Our church doesn't have to pay taxes on the tithes that it collects.
No, it's what you call a non-profit organization. There's no taxes there unless you do that. Now there are things going on. Sometimes they remove the non-profit status of a church politically, and that's going on today. There are things that the government, even our government, is trying to become more powerful in churches, and I think we ought to just we ought to just fall back as historic Baptists. I think we ought to just lay back and let it be. There are Baptists in the world today, in America and in other parts of the world, that will not even go down in whatever state they're in and have a non-profit organization. They just ignore the government. They're just going to go. They want total separation of church and state. They will not do anything. They will not perform a legal marriage in their church at all. I was going to bring you some of these little. Not at all.
Just common law marriages?
No, they're not common law. They don't go down and get a license at all.
Right, that's common law.
Yeah, they won't do that. But what they say, a marriage is between a man and a woman and God, and that has nothing to do with anything else. Now, there are many people and many churches still today that believe that. I said a little earlier, and as we studied, remember when we studied that old booklet? We haven't got finished with that yet, did we?
Which booklet is that?
That second part of this. Of this. I think we're on the second side of this also. Okay? About to run out of time here. I was going to bring you some more things, but we were studying last week the statement of the Paulicians. Okay? Now there are churches today. I've got a flyer at home sent out by it's Primitive Baptist and what they believe. And it says 5 reasons why you shouldn't get a marriage license by the state and be married by a license. I just want you to be aware of something. I'm not promoting this. I'm just telling you historically what Baptists have stood for in the past. I want you to be aware of it. Baptists are like cows. Okay? Baptists are like cows in a pasture. When you steer a cow in a pasture, he goes all the way to the other side to the fence and gets way over there. Baptists historically, when they see somebody do one thing, they will, to stand against it, they'll go completely to the other side and sometimes to the extreme side to stand against it. As I told you last week, Baptists, in all of the organized churches, in every Protestant, and every state, in every church, in every Protestant church has had a church-state relationship, except for Baptists in history. And I think we'll still do that. All right? But Baptists, at one time, when the Protestants, when they put their pastors up on pulpits, you've seen those big tall pulpits up there, and they spoke down to the people. They dug a hole or built a hole in their church houses and made the pastor speak up to them, and they said he was a servant. He was not their superior, but he was their servant. The congregation was superior over the pastor because he was a servant of the flock. Well, that's kind of extreme, but they did this. All right? Now, on your little papers here, have you got these? The Doctrines of the Paulicians? Anyone need these? You need one? You need one of these? We studied part of this. You can catch up on all the stuff on that CD that I gave you. Number 10. They denied, now as you see here, this is written in Old English, all right? Old English. Before 1800, there was a final and an S in English, and there was an S in the word. Look at the word sins there. Sins is written like this. All right? Sins. This is actually an S. And then where you have a hard C, it looked like this. Like doctrines. That word looked like that. It looked like an E. Doctrine. I'm trying to write in Greek. Doctrine. All right? So we had two different letters. A C that looked like an E, and an S that was in the word and at the final. And like we said, Hebrew has 5, I believe it's 5? 5 finals and 5 finals in it. They denied that the sins of departed spirits could be in any measure atoned for by the celebration of masses. Now this is these people, these Paulicians. These are Anabaptists, okay? That the distribution of alms to the poor are a vicarious penance, and they treated of consequence the doctrine of purgatory as a ridiculous fable. That's what they said. Now this goes back over 1,000 years ago. All right? This is before the Reformation. Way long before the Reformation. They considered marriage as a pernicious institution. Here we are. Okay? They considered marriage as a pernicious institution and absurdly condemned without distinction all connubial bonds. They're not talking about a man being married to a woman. They're talking about marriage by license of the state. Okay? That's exactly. This is written by the enemies of the Baptists. This is not written by the Baptists. This is written by their enemies. Okay? Now, Baptists have always believed in marriage, but they do not believe in marriage by the state at this time. It didn't happen among Baptist churches until about 1940 in America. The average common person in a Baptist church didn't get a marriage license until it became common in the 40s and 50s. They looked at certain sort of veneration and worship as do the apostles and martyrs, from which, however, they excluded such as were confessors, in which class they comprehended the saints who had not suffered death of the cause of Christ, and whose bodies in the esteem had nothing more sacred than any other human carcass. You remember, in churches they had pieces of bones from saints. You know, John the Baptist's head was in several places that I've been. Had his head in Damascus, had his head over here, and had his head over there. And how many heads he had, or pieces of heads, I don't know, but they had his heads all over the place. And his fingers, and Paul's toes and fingers, and you'll see in different churches. They used to name the churches after the piece of the saint that they had in it. St. Paul's Cathedral, St. Peter's. They had some piece of Peter there. All right? Some piece of Paul. St. Mark's. St. Matthew. All right? St. John's. They declared the use of instrumental music in churches and other religious assemblies superstitious and unlawful. Well, we sure wouldn't make it here, would we? Why did they say that? Why did they say that instrumental music in churches was unlawful?
There's something in the Bible that says something a little bit like that. There's
no.
Denomination now that...
Remember what I told you about Baptists running plumb to the other side of the pen? to the pasture? All the great ballads, all the great orchestrations of music that they had, with Bach and Beethoven and all of those, these great orchestrations that they had, these great operas, were all paid for by the state church. And all the great orchestras and everything that they used were all state churches. And when Baptists saw that, they said, we're not going to have that in our place, in our churches. So they run plumb to the other side of the field. Now, what churches in America today do not, or what churches forbid the use of instrumental music in them?
It used to be the Church of Christ.
Church of Christ. Why? Why does the Church of Christ
There's
do
not
that?
something somewhere in the Bible, some little thing that they misinterpreted?
No. Alexander Campbell was a Baptist before he was a Church of Christ, and he was a Baptist when Baptists didn't allow instrumental music in churches. And he was a defender of the Baptist faith. And he took with him that which the Baptists taught at that time. Now, since then, Baptists have started using instrumental music in the churches. I don't see anything in the world wrong with it at all. But what they were standing for was the truth. Anything that the state church did, they went plumb to the other side. They went a little extreme on this. Okay? A little bit to the extreme. Here is one inconsistency that we can find in these ancient people. It's not wrong, but it was inconsistency. Anything the state church did, they did the opposite, didn't they? So they wouldn't have instrumental music in their churches. Did David play an instrument?
Yeah, and he raised his hand.
Yeah.
And he was pretty charismatic.
Number 13. That was it. Instrumental music churches. Number 14. They denied that the cross on which Christ suffered was in any respect more sacred than any other kind of wood. And the consequence resulted to pay to it the smallest degree of religious worship. Baptist churches never had a cross in them or on them. Never. Until recent times. Why? Because all the other denominations and the great Catholic Church all had crosses. When you walk into a Catholic church, what do you see? A crucifix with Jesus on it, and you bow down and you do the sign of the cross. All right.
Basically, what they're doing is they're using the scripture where you're not to boil the milk of the the meat
in the milk
of its mother. Mm-hmm. In other words, you're not supposed to do what the pagans do.
Yeah, don't do like the pagans do. In other words, they stayed away from it. They wouldn't accept the cross. They loved the cross of Christ in that they loved Christ that went on the cross, but they weren't going to kiss the cross. That's like kissing the shadow, people. You kiss the real person you love, not his shadow or her shadow. They were shocked at the subordination and distinctions that were established among the clergy and at different degrees of authority that were conferred upon different members of the sacred body. What's that talking about? Bishops, cardinals, ward captains, whatever you want to put it. They said there's no such thing. What they believed in was pastors and deacons, and they were elders in the church, and they were servants of the church. They were not to have any power over the churches at all other than preaching God's Word. Nothing but preaching God's Word. Well, you've had this for over an hour tonight. Have you learned anything tonight? Next week we're going to fall into it again. We're going to go back to our Trail of Blood chart and study that. Thank you for being here. And if you miss any classes or if you want them, you can go on the website and you can hear the classes almost up to date. I think even last week's maybe. Probably. Yeah, you can hear last week's lesson on there. And if you need any, if you want to borrow them, you can. If you want to buy them, they're $2 a CD or whatever. And anyway, do you have any questions before I turn you loose on the Word? It's good to see you sticking out in the course. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're becoming Baptist. My desire is to make you a Baptist or you won't go anyplace. Brother Phil told me here a while back, he said, one thing about it, he said, when you make a Baptist, he said, they don't go anyplace else. They have no place else to go. They won't run off to some other church. They are real Baptists, and they know why they're Baptists. And that's why we're doing this discipleship class, is to understand, you're a Baptist? Are you really a Baptist, or are you just Baptist by name? All right. Brother Bill, would you dismiss us in prayer, please, brother? Sure.